What does mystical theology have to do with the problem of evil? Well, that's exactly what my friend Travis Worth and I discussed today. We look at the tradition of mysticism situated specifically in the Eastern Orthodox tradition of Christianity. We look at St. Maximus the Confessor and his wider ideas about almost a cosmic theosis and divinization view of the teleological end of reality. And we look at what that could do for us if we take Roderick Chisholm's views on the defeat of evil that is also adapted and is used in the likes of John Schneider, Trent Doherty, and Marilyn McCord Adams. We take those strands together and we look at the way the universe is developing. What could we expect if God exists and these greater ideas are integrated into a holistic picture for addressing one of the most age-old questions and arguments against the existence of God, which is the problem of evil, or as I like to say, arguments from evil. I hope that you will enjoy this one. This gets a little technical, gets a little deep, but we like to do that here on this channel. Alrighty, let's get into it. Alrighty, guys. Well, welcome back. I have an awesome segment for you today. I'm here joined with my good buddy and a philosophical partner in crime, as well as in theology, Travis Worth. Today, we're going to be talking about one of our favorite topics. Dude, this is a topic that you and I go over probably multiple times weekly. We've had many phone calls over.
For well over a year.
Seriously. And this is the everything concerning the problem of evil, but specifically the defeat of evil. But we're adding a little twist to it. Travis has been kind of migrating and carving out a pathway by integrating mystical theology, specifically from the fathers and in the Eastern Orthodox tradition, into the greater work of addressing arguments from evil in theodicy and in theological works and narratives like the kind pioneered by Chisholm, Adams, Doherty, Schneider, etc. And we're going to get into all of that. But I just wanted to get that out of the way so that you guys exactly know what we're going to be going over today. Travis, go ahead. Say a little bit about yourself. Who are you? What are you doing on the channel? What did you do to deserve to be on this glorious channel?
Right.
And then what do you have to present to us on its once?
Yeah, so I'm Travis. I've always had, for the last several years, I have a real love and passion for the philosophy of religion and philosophy in general. And I've really started getting heavily into theology about, I would say, 2 years ago. And that's where I ended up converting to Eastern Orthodoxy. And so for like the last year to year and a half, I've just been immersing myself in the Orthodox literature and culture. And I found it to be very spiritually fulfilling. And it's like, I know that's where I belong. And so it has changed some of my views, given that my view is more apophatic now than it once was. And there are some changes, but I just love this stuff. And I know we talk about it a lot. And so I'm looking forward to just laying it all out there.
Yeah, man. I mean, honestly, and everyone paying attention and watching right now, this is going to be a very exploratory kind of conversation. There's going to be a bit of speculation in there. There's going to be a lot of things that have been worked out and have been well thought out. And some other areas where it's like, hey, this may be at the edge of our thinking. We don't know exactly what the implications of some of these arguments or some of these topics could be, but we're here to explore. You know, the heart of philosophy is to envelop yourself in wisdom and thinking and to love it for its own sake. And a big value of that is, hey, we're each trying to carve a pathway and understanding what's very clear to us and getting into more fundamental, deeper layers of that. And that's exactly what this is. And so I really, really like the mystical theological aspect. I consider myself a mystic. I may not live the most amazing ascetic life. I might not be the exemplar of what that looks like or the exemplar of a kind of mysticism, right? But it is something that I am very passionate about as far as an existential level and how I live my own life. Now, we talk about the defeat of evil versus some other ways of understanding evil. I mean, Travis, how would you explain to someone the difference between how theodicists go about thinking of evil in terms of an eventual defeat and evil in terms of, oh, well, it's more so something that should be only required if it need be, like this very utilitarian consequentialist way
Right.
of looking at it. Can you
Yeah.
distinguish those for us?
Yeah, so there's and I like John Schneider lays this out really well in his book. There's what's known as a necessity condition, and that's where a person of normative ethics will prevent suffering when they can, except when to not do so will cause some other greater evil to occur and things of that nature. So it's basically what you and I are under as it's just normative ethics. Then there's what Roderick Chisholm, John Schneider, Trent Doherty, and others have coined the defeat condition, and that's where the view is that on this view that evil is organically integrated into an overall good whole and defeated.
Hey, real fast. Listen, I totally understand if these concepts are difficult and hard to grasp, but good news is you do not need to settle for that. Text this number on the screen or look at the link in the comment section, and I can help you with whatever you need. I want to serve you on your journey here. Text this number on the screen, look at the comment section, the link that's available there. I'm here to help you out. With that being said, let's get right back into the video.
It's made to be valuable, non-regrettable, and redeemed. And so this would say that God is morally permissible in allowing states of affairs that can ultimately be redeemed.
Yeah. I really like that. A lot of people have a really hard time getting out of the kind of other way of thinking, the necessity
Yeah,
condition.
and I've noticed even after you explain it, they tend to you'll use a defeat condition, and then they'll kind of judge it by necessity condition standards.
Exactly,
That happens all
exactly.
the time. Yeah.
I mean, and this is a big one, right? Because most people would agree that arguments from evil against theism are
Mhm.
supposed to be an internal critique of some sort. There's supposed to
Yes.
be some
Yeah.
internal tension within theism and the data of evil
Right.
where it is not present with other theories, right?
Right.
But
Yeah.
the issue is that no one ever asks the theist or ever looks into the internal logic of theism. Very, very scarcely.
Right.
This is the
That's a
biggest
good
problem
point.
with
Yeah.
the atheist philosophers' work. And then what they'll do is they will almost question beg, in a sense, a particular normative stance that they think that the theism that they're critiquing is
Right.
actually held by, as though it has been there the entire time. But it's actually not.
Right. Exactly.
Kyle Allender and I actually call this the myth of shared axiology, where it's actually a myth
Yeah.
that we're actually
Yeah.
sharing it.
Yeah, I like that because it's just assumed. But yeah, it's so what we want to look at is, does theism contain the theoretical components that would lead us to expect an eventual defeat of this? And this kind of gets into an issue too with my own particular view, is that as more of an apophatic, we hold that God's essence is transcendent and incomprehensible, but his energies or activities are imminent, and so we see glimpses of his goodness, and we have what's known as the Dionysian principle that that goodness has a tendency to spread, and so God is perfect goodness would be inclined to spread his goodness, although there's some kind of tension there because his very essence is incomprehensible, and so it's more of looking at the energies. And I agree with Andrew Louth that sometimes essence and energies can be confusing. So we could just look at the essence as God's inner nature, and the energies has his outward actions. So that's kind of a way to do that. So we say that we don't have access to his inner nature, only his outer actions. And so we can look at certain things and say, is that compatible with God spreading his goodness and so on?
Yeah, absolutely. And first, I want to let the audience know, obviously, this is almost a law of nature. When you go to record, someone has to be doing yard work and using a weed whacker outside. So just bear with it while we're here. This is what we're rolling with. Dude,
Yeah.
what I love about the essence energies distinction when I first heard of it is I forget whoever put it this way, but it's
Mhm.
I've also heard of God's energies is also being called his activities.
Yeah,
Right?
that's exactly it. His divine activities. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
Father Andrew Louth has made a point that that's typically, especially with people who aren't that familiar with the view, that's a much better way to kind of lay it out as God's essence and his divine activities. So the
Right.
energies are just outward divine activities, what he's doing.
Right. And that would and it would follow very naturally that obviously God is not identical in essence to an activity, right?
Right.
And everything.
But well, I do want to stop you there because we say that the energies are still God. I mean, it's very much God.
Right.
So, but yeah, it's not the essence. But we would say that his divine energies, that is God in a very real sense.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's like another way is I like to view it as like reality as this flowing spirit of God that pervades and touches everything, right?
Right.
And so you are being able to. It's very much like what Aquinas talked about when he talked about
Mhm.
the how reality reflects the vast and diverse array of objects that exist and items that exist in reality
Right.
reflect the beautiful nature of God in some way.
Right.
And what is lacking in one particular entity
Mhm.
is actually supplied in another. And so, in a
Yeah.
way, you're actually able to come into contact, quote unquote, with God,
Yes.
but
That's
it's not
exactly
on
right.
the level of essence of that very, very rich and core intrinsicality that
Right.
you would agree with, are epistemically closed off to, right?
Yes.
And that's the
That's
whole
right.
point of this mystical ascension, this theosis,
Right.
right? This process
Yeah.
of divinization, which is to becoming ever so close to it. I think about it like the concept of a limit in calculus, right? Where
Sure.
the
You can
line
only
never
go
meets
so
the
high.
limit. Yeah, but you progress ever so slowly. And that's
Yeah.
honestly, or not so slowly, but you progress ever so approximately. And then you zoom in and there's more and you zoom in and
Right.
there's just it's
I like
on
that. Yeah,
yeah.
it's like because even in eternity, we will never. There will always be something more to learn about God. Like we can never fully penetrate the full essence. We will always be growing closer to Him, learning more, and everything. So I really like that.
Now, what do you
Yeah.
do with somebody just real fast before we get into the bulk of what you want to show us today? What
Mhm.
I can already hear some in the comments going, okay, but how do you know any of that? How do you know that this is what it's like with God and
Yes.
divinization,
Okay.
looking at
Good.
all
Yeah.
this stuff? How would you lovingly, explain to someone how this can be rationally grounded
Right.
in just how we would reason? How would you do that?
Yeah, so I think that's an important question to ask. And on this view, we experience God's energies primarily experientially, and that's and I don't mean experiential in the sense of a subjective religious experience, but more is a life of transformation. It's a life of accumulating the virtues and putting to death sinful passions and following the sacraments of the church. It's in a way that's expressed liturgically. So you could think of the sacraments of the church as sort of safety rails that keep you from going off too far with the experiential aspect. And what it is based on that experiential aspect. It's very holistic. We do use natural theology and so forth. So we would see God that like the beauty and order of creation would reflect an icon of God. And there's some, we do natural theology. And I know one possible concern too is that if God is just wholly other, then how are we going to do natural theology? And I agree with that, but it's important to note that this is not saying that. On this view, we are getting, like you mentioned, glimpses of His goodness. So it's not just wholly other either. It's very panentheist in a way because he feels creation like the Orthodox prayer. The Holy Spirit fills all things. He's everywhere present, fills all things. But he's also transcendent and unknowable at the same time. And so there's this holistic way that we mystically experience him. That's what it really means to be mystical, is that experiential aspect of accumulating virtues, putting to death sinful passions, living a life of the sacraments, and so on. And it's the fathers had what they called the nous. Now it doesn't translate well because they actually use a different word for it now, like in modern Greek. But then it basically meant the spiritual intellect, and that's how we experientially, know God and so forth. And so they were also very big on the discursive reasoning. But the way they looked at it, and this kind of ties it all together, is they would say that the the nous or the spiritual intellect illuminates the discursive reasoning. So you do discursive reasoning and natural theology and things of that sort when your nous, your spiritual intellect has come into contact with God. So it's like you're looking at rational arguments from more of your spiritual perspective, that mystical perspective.
Well said. I really, really like
Hmm.
that. And for a lot of people, explore the mystic tradition.
Oh yeah,
In Western modern, 2024, we have this resurgence, especially in culture, with this more new agey, quasi-spiritual obsession with Eastern spiritualities, where when we
hmm,
think about mystics, we think of like Hindu or Buddhist Zen masters.
yeah, yeah,
But people need to understand that the bulk of the church fathers in Christianity, these are individuals who had direct apprenticeships under the founding apostles that Christ
yes,
himself
right,
vested authority in to establish the church and how he
right.
sees
There's
fit led by the Spirit.
yeah,
These
there's
people were mystics.
apostolic succession. Like yeah, that's a good
Yeah,
point.
these people were mystics. Mysticism is as familiar to Christianity as church is familiar to Christianity, right?
Right.
And so I would recommend people, you're not going to get an entire thesis, doctoral dissertation here on the merits and the
Hmm.
reasons why you should desire to understand mysticism, but you should at least have your curiosity piqued on how to understand this better, because a lot of the times we do analytic theology, but analytic
Right. Right.
theology needs at some point to touch the existential. And the mysticism is
Right.
a really, really good way to do that. And I think it's honestly essential when
Exactly.
you get to a certain level. With
Right.
that being said, I really want to see how you integrate this into responding to the data of certain evil, right? That be
Okay.
horrendous suffering, animal suffering, things of that sort. And
Sure.
so, how do you want to start off? Do you want to start off basically going over you're talking about like the typical Orthodox approaches to the problem of evil, and
Well,
then get
yeah.
into the
Since
argument, or the other way around? How do you want to do
no,
that?
I think we're going in a good progression. It's so we know that the spiritual intellect that we experience mystically is what illuminates our discursive reasoning. And so with that in mind, let's there are about 7 different ways the Eastern Orthodox tradition approaches the problem of evil, and I think it might be valuable to kind of start there, and then we can kind of form our own theory based off that background.
Perfect. I got a little awesome little doc for us to play
Yeah,
around with.
that's actually the argument. Yeah.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, hey, let's
Did you want to go to the other?
yeah, we
Yeah.
start up
Yeah.
here. All right.
Okay.
You said there's seven here. Perfect. I love it. All
Right.
righty. All right, let's start from the top. What do we got? You said we have free will.
Yeah. So the first is going to be free will. It's pretty basic. True love is possible through free will. The second is that God is love, and so He intends the good things. And if you read number 3, that's really compatible with what we were talking about with the notion of defeat. So can you read that, or do you want me to?
Yeah, I got it. So yeah, so with
Okay.
eschatological hope for number 3, we read the Eastern Orthodox perspective emphasizes the present age is marred by sin and evil, but it looks forward to the eschaton, the final event in the divine plan, the end of the world, where God will rectify all wrongs. The suffering of the present will be defeated by the glory that is to be revealed. And then the citation here for Romans 8:18, which I think is awesome.
Exactly. And so this is really going to get into if you look at number 4, I think this is really important too. And this was really big with the church fathers is participation in Christ's suffering. That
Yeah, so we
those,
read here the Orthodox Church teaches that through Christ's incarnation, suffering, and resurrection, God has entered into the fullness of human pain and has transformed it. Thus, suffering is not meaningless, but is taken up into the life of God Himself. Christians are called to participate in Christ's sufferings and thereby find their own suffering to be redemptive, non-regrettable value. Okay, so I really, really like that. I want to
yeah.
say one thing on that, which is
Yeah,
a
please.
lot of people don't see the value of the non-regrettable part when it comes to the defeat, right? Because people talk
Yeah,
about,
that's
well,
so
is it
true.
endorsement? Is it non-regret? And whatnot. I mean,
Right.
Travis, think about it. Have you seen those videos on YouTube where people close to their time of death, people in old age are talking about their regrets, right? Kind of deathbed regrets.
Oh,
Like,
sure.
what do you
Yeah.
wish you would have done more of? And it's interesting because they view their life on the whole. They view their entire life history
Yes.
in terms of whether or not it is regrettable or non-regrettable. And I find that
Right.
interesting, which is they view their life as worth being lived in terms of the
Hmm.
regrets versus non-regrets. And I think that for every one of those people, they would view their lives as being worth lived their entire life
Sure.
history in the perspective of it being non-regrettable. I find that amazing
Right.
because the defeat of evil is the exact same thing. I find it interesting that that is how we think when we get to our deaths and we actually look at
Right.
it always on the whole versus this other
Yeah.
idea, right? Where we look at where we have to hyper focus on individual sufferings
Yeah.
rather than
That's it.
how the individual sufferings integrated themselves because these people at the end of their lives, they're not obsessed over all of the sufferings and all of the
Right.
trauma that they experienced. They just want to know if their life was full of regrets or not. And
Right.
if all those things add up to be a non-regrettable whole, that's ultimately what anyone else would wish to ask for. But go ahead.
Yeah. So, I think you laid that out beautifully, and that's really going to be important when we start looking at the problem of evil itself and sort of a response, because we're going to look at suffering on the whole versus at some temporary time t. So when we judge like this being compatible or incompatible with theism, we look at what obtains on the whole, not necessarily some temporary state. So I think it's very crucial to kind of differentiate on the whole versus temporary suffering right there.
Absolutely. Yeah, moving on to 5, we have mystery and
Yeah.
humility.
Yeah.
What do we got for that one?
Yeah, so this is going to be kind of like getting into the mystical approach that God, in His essence, is unknowable. In fact, the Orthodox view creation as a mystery, so they view like the creation of the world as mysterious, that it kind of transcends our understanding, which incidentally fits very well with the origin of the universe and how we don't know if there was actually a beginning or not, and all that. But yeah, so they view, while seeking to offer explanations and comfort, the Eastern Orthodox tradition acknowledges the mystery of evil and suffering, and it teaches humility in the face of overwhelming questions. And it suggests that our finite human mind can't fully grasp the ways of the infinite ways of God.
Hey, real fast. Listen, I totally understand if these concepts are difficult and hard to grasp, but good news is you do not need to settle for that. Text this number on the screen or look at the link in the comment section, and I can help you with whatever you need. I want to serve you on your journey here. Text this number on the screen, look at the comment section, the link that's available there. I'm here to help you out. With that being said, let's get right back into the video.
And even the mystery of evil and suffering itself, because we do look at suffering as being mysterious in many aspects.
I like that. I like that. And honestly, I think that this goes hand in hand with in Schneider's book on the Darwinian problem of evil. He talks
Right,
about how the aesthetic theological line of reasoning and response that we actually
right.
see given in Job, very much the kind of response God gives to Job is one that
Hmm.
actually emphasizes an aspect of mystery and humility, which is, hey, you
Exactly.
may not understand fully why you are going through what you're going through. But then it's also this idea of, but
Trust in it.
right,
Yeah.
not that I will make all things right in the end for you.
Right.
And you will be able to understand that for yourself as well. It's always this hindsight perspective. And so, even in an
Exactly.
aesthetic response, when it comes with theodicy, which is defeat laden. There is this built-in aspect of humility and mystery, but it's honestly, I don't think it's emphasized enough, and it's really, really cool to see that the EO tradition has a
Yeah.
very large emphasis on that because that it is an experiential aspect of this entire thing. And I'm really glad
Oh,
that I
very
never did.
much.
Okay, I
Yeah.
like
So
this one. Sorry, go ahead.
yeah. Oh no, I was going to say, with the mystery that Eastern Orthodoxy is really, that's almost what they're known for is they look at, a lot of the ways of God are mysterious, but they don't just say that arbitrarily. It's, God in his infinite essence is incomprehensible, and so we know him through his energies experientially and so forth. But yeah,
Absolutely.
getting into number six, this is going to be really important as well. More than just providing a solely intellectual response to evil, the Orthodox Church invites, the faithful to live a life of prayer and asceticism and transform personal suffering into a path toward holiness and theosis. Like I was saying earlier, with accumulating the virtues, putting to death the sinful passions, growing more like Christ. So the journey of theosis is basically the journey of becoming more like Christ. And so he gave us, an example to live by in the incarnation. And so we're to kind of follow that model. And, a lot of times suffering can bring about holiness, but we're called to even more than just intellectually respond to it, to live a life of holiness and use ascetic practices.
I really, really love that because in the EO tradition, salvation is identical to divinization, theosis.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so evil and struggling against evil and transforming that and using that potential towards victory and triumph and redemption in one's own life to grow is actually a part of your salvation. It's actually
Oh yeah.
an integral part of the divinization process. And this is where people who I might have some Protestant viewers here who may not be totally familiar, or maybe even agnostic or atheist viewers here who don't even might not know the difference in understanding when it comes to justification and things, versus
Right.
more of a Lutheran kind of style forensic view versus this
Sure.
process of participation. But in the EO tradition, salvation is a life history. It is a future tense, not a past tense
Exactly.
understanding.
Exactly. And we're called to active. Well, first of all, with the Orthodox, and as far as salvation, we're to actively participate. We have to freely choose it and then actively participate. And God does the heavy lifting, so to speak, obviously. But yeah, we have to choose it and uh, freely participate in it under the guidance of the Holy Spirit.
Yeah, the way I see it is, and you talked about guardrails earlier, the safety railings earlier on the
Yes,
left and
that's
right
the
side.
sacraments. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And a big part of it is I view it as I actually gave a talk on this at a youth group on a Christian theory of transformation, and I drew a lot on a lot of these ancient traditions. And the idea in my mind is think about like infrastructure, right? In everyday life, we have roads, we have electrical wiring, and we have gas stations, right? And places to pump up your tires for air and things like that. That's the infrastructure, and that's there to ensure that humans can actually exist and actually conduct themselves
Sure.
to actually
Right.
live to actually be able to live their lives, right? You need to be able to go from A to B. You have bus stops, all these different things, places to eat, right? You have this infrastructure, and
Right.
what I view God's part that He plays is He gives us the infrastructure, right? This is the path. These are the things that you need for the success of the divinization process, right? And
Yes.
and and that infrastructure is there that's designed for our success, and it is up to us freely to
Yeah.
walk on that and to actually participate in the infrastructure
Right.
that's already been laid for us to do that, right? It'd be like saying,
Right.
hey, you have a car, you have all the roads, you have all the gas stations, and to get from A to B. And how are you going to get to A to B? Well, you need to step in the car, you need to turn the key, you need to go get the gas, you need to go get there,
Exactly.
right? And that's our participation in the divinization
Right.
process. And a lot of people have a kind of a hard time sometimes understanding exactly
Well,
how quote unquote salvation plays out in that way.
Yeah, and I want to highlight too that God does draw us, and He does give us grace. So He draws us with the Holy Spirit and gives us the grace we need to successfully move towards Him and participation. But it does. There needs to be some free will. Like you have to really want this, and you have to actively participate. So it's not just like say a prayer and you're saved, and then that's it. Like it involves like your active participation.
Say a prayer and you're saved.
Yeah,
Oh, sorry. The way you said it, it's just
well,
funny.
I'm a former Southern Baptist, so
Well, yeah,
I'm saying
I
that from
I grew up
experience.
in a Baptist environment in the first moments of my church life. So I laughed out because it's just that is what is taught, you know.
Right,
But
and
it's just so
I
funny,
know
you know.
somewhat objected, about the idea of losing your salvation, but it seems reasonable to me that God wants us to freely choose to love Him, and He
Yeah.
asks us to, participate, and He gives us the divine grace to do so. All this is saying is that He leaves it open if we want to one day say, you know what, I no longer love you, I don't want to be with you, and just commit apostasy. You have that freedom out of a loving relationship. And so, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Moving on to number 7, community and compassion. What do
Yeah.
we
So
have for
this,
that?
yeah, this is going to be another one that's really important, especially practically. And the Orthodox Church emphasizes the communal response to suffering. I know the Cappadocian Fathers, like Saint Basil, Saint Gregory of Nyssa, they were really big on this idea of like a communal response to suffering, where individuals are called to bear one another's burdens and to respond to evil with acts of charity and love, and to be kind of like God's agents of relief in the world.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So there's that gentle aspect that is highlighted there. And I like what it says here, which is the Eastern Orthodox theologians maintain that discussion of evil must be rooted not only in doctrine, but also in pastoral concern
Yes.
and the liturgical life of the church. The problem of evil is addressed not only through theological discourse, but lived out and wrestled with in daily life of faithful communal worship and the sacraments. I love that. That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Well, quickly
We can get to the
transitioning
argument
to,
later.
what
Are
you
you
say?
wanting to get in? Are you wanting to get into the argument
Well, I
now?
mean,
Or
do you have any other things you want to say in that? Because I mean, I really do want to see how you incorporate these ideas into, your abductive
okay.
argument here. I know that you utilize an IBE framework and everything like that. And so, unless you have anything else you kind of want to add, I think that's great to move on to this part.
Yeah, we could go ahead and move on to that. Just kind of for the audience to pay attention to what we've laid out so far. That we're going off the axiological notion of defeat rather than a necessity condition, and to understand what that means, and to understand that we're saying that God is can still be said to be good to us, provided He only allows states of affairs that can ultimately be defeated. And so there's one, in this, like, when we were going through the list, like number 5 with participation in Christ's sufferings, you'll notice that just is Marilyn McCord Adams' view. If you read her work on horrendous suffering, that, the value of that intimacy with Christ will be so valuable, it becomes non-regrettable and a part of the agent's identity on the whole. And so, and so I like with these, when I frame, any argument, it kind of gives me a view that I want to be consistent with the church, with the doctrines of the church, and yet still philosophically robust in my response too. And so I really like the way Trent Doherty and John Schneider have responded to the problem of animal pain. And so I kind of wanted to take the same type of approach as Schneider did, but I wanted to sort of frame it in my own view, because I'm really big into St. Maximus the Confessor's work. I really follow his metaphysics. And I think St. Maximus's view offers a really good sort of story or narrative under which we could view the progression of the creation and animals. And so I wanted to kind of highlight, specifically the problem of Darwinian evils and animal pain, and how we could kind of look at it through this kind of interpretive lens.
Sure, love it, absolutely.
Yeah.
So you have 3 points right here that you start out with before you get into the
Yes.
into your abductive framework here. For number one, we have our observation, right, which is that
Yes.
animal pain and suffering exist in the natural world. I feel like that's pretty
Yes.
simple. But is there anything you want to add to that?
No, I think that's pretty uncontroversial.
That's going to be our
Yeah.
explanatory target right now.
Yeah.
This is irregardless of worldview. This is the fact of the matter.
Right.
And so then moving on to number two, we have our theory, and I like this. You put in Saint Maximus the Confessor's teleological view of creation posits that all creatures, including animals, are moving towards theosis, where suffering is integrated into a redemptive narrative. Now, I want to stop here for a second for people to
Yeah.
understand one thing. One, I can already hear so many people rushing to the comments, typing really fast on the keyboard, right?
Right.
Ad hoc move, right? Why should anyone accept this particular theory that's going to ultimately be used as a potential direct explanation of the data, right? Well, first, I want to let everyone know what Travis is doing is he's doing something great, which is he's actually in line with the most latest and contemporary work that's done in actually even a broader explanationist and Bayesian framework, right? Which is this idea that if you're going to explain anything, right, any observation, right, you're going to need some kind of theory, right? But not only are you going to need some kind of theory, right, but ultimately, and this is actually what I think I have it right here, Trent Doherty's book right here. This is what Trent called a narrative approach to explanation or probability. What does that mean? Well, the idea is that all of our theories are narratives, right? And all of
Yes.
our theories
Yes.
are
That's right.
are concerning the whole of what the data is, how it could be integrated, et cetera, and so forth. Think about evolutionary theory, right? I mean, yeah, we have all these diverse data points, but evolutionary theory is about this grand diversity in the biosphere of how biological entities are being modified, acquiring traits, adapting, changing, things like that. It is an exhaustive narrative of organismal development and change. So in this way, what Travis is putting forth here is he's putting forth a theologically situated theory of animal pain and suffering. And we have to go through and we have to exhaust the list of the entire conceptual space of theories that could explain this, right? Now,
Yes.
obviously, he's taking his cues from a particular philosopher, theologian, early church father, St. Maximus the Confessor, right? But ultimately, in the end, we really need to evaluate this based on, is this really an ad hoc move? Does it meet the necessary requirements for explaining the data? And in the end, does it actually illuminate more than what we could be comparing it against? And ultimately, how weighty is it in the end? And those things are going to go for any theory that we need to be able to settle. So I want to first put that on the table because people are probably going to be thinking, Travis, oh, look at all this theology he's throwing at it. And I know you're
Oh,
going to be
sure.
able to go through that down the road, but I just want to put that in people's minds right now because I know a lot of people are going to shut their minds off from hearing everything else
Well,
we want to say.
yeah, and I would want to interject that we're looking at the observation, and it's typically said that, well, this is really surprising on theism. I'm saying, well, hey, no, actually, it's not. That under this theological framework, it has the explanatory resources to account for it and make it, probable, outcome.
Absolutely. And
So,
then we have our supporting evidence, right?
yes,
Biological convergence and cosmic fine-tuning to this purposeful design and creation. I love this. I love how you
yes.
included, hey, I see some Simon Conway Morris in there, right?
Oh, yes,
And some
yes.
fine-tuning, and that's your jam all the way down the
Yeah.
line. You know,
Well, I
what
think it supports that teleological view. That creatures, because creatures are moving towards theosis or participation in the divine life, and so you could look at the fine-tuning and biological convergence as sort of a midway point to where the creation is forming and moving towards its ultimate end goal of theosis. Think of it as like a midway point where it's on its way participating to the final outcome on the whole.
I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, real fast. Listen, I totally understand if these concepts are difficult and hard to grasp, but good news is you do not need to settle for that. Text this number on the screen or look at the link in the comment section, and I can help you with whatever you need. I want to serve you on your journey here. Text this number on the screen, look at the comment section, the link that's available there. I'm here to help you out. With that being said, let's get right back into the video. And moving towards the IBE framework. Okay, take it away, Travis. What do we got here?
Yeah, so I'm going to say observation O. Again, animal pain and suffering exist in the natural world. My theory T is that Saint Maximus the Confessor's teleological view of creation posits that all creatures are moving towards participation in the divine life, theosis, integrating sufferings into a larger, meaningful redemptive narrative that thereby defeats those sufferings. Going back to our axiology. And so the supporting evidence E is that the concepts of biological convergence and fine tuning indicate purposeful design, which aligns with and supports the teleological view of creation I just mentioned. And so if those are true, then it would follow that since the observation O of animal pain and suffering can be coherently explained by the theory T, supported by evidence E, this teleological framework offers a robust theological explanation for the existence of animal suffering.
Beautiful, beautiful. Yeah.
And so then I finally kind of structured it here. This is how I would structure it.
Perfect. Yeah. So ultimately, I want to hit on a couple of things in this argument.
Yeah.
I like this part right here, whereas you're building it up, and then you have the observation of animal pain and suffering best explained by the teleological view of creation, supported by the evidence of purposeful design. Now, what's really interesting is how you have two aspects, right? You have, okay, well, first of all, we need to distinguish between the world, how we know that the world is teleological when it comes to the domain of organisms, or how we know that the world is teleological. And like how you addressed that right off the bat, which is, okay, well, actually, we have two pieces of supporting evidence here, right? We have convergence, and then we have fine tuning. Now,
and I would just add, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but just real quick, when I say fine tuning, because it's not just like the laws and the boundary conditions of the initial conditions. It's actually, there's fine tuning, a lot of teleological data in our cluster of galaxies, the solar system, the planet, the moon, the interactions, a lot of all kinds of planetary conditions like the, chemistry in the atmosphere to the biochemistry. And so there's fine tuning all the way down, and then there's this biological convergence. And I'm saying, well, hey, this this makes sense given this teleological view, or there's an end goal.
Yes, absolutely. And I want to point out, first of all, some people may not know what convergence is, in the first place, because cosmic fine tuning. I'd be surprised if some people never heard of that before. But biological convergence, and this is taken from Simon. I have his book somewhere over there. I'll grab it, but I'm not going to get up. But Simon Conway Morris has really done a good job as to making it more known what this phenomenon is. And I'm going to give kind of my way of looking at it, and then if you have a different way of looking at it, then you can add that too. But basically, what biological convergence is we often think about evolution as in divergence, meaning you have a population of organisms that split off into another population, and over time, as it branches out, these populations become more distinct and diverse in terms of their variety of characteristics. This population over here has a completely different set of characteristics than this population over here, phenotypically and genotypically, right? And so, for example, an elephant and a giraffe, right? That's divergence, right? Very diverse. Yes. And if you trace the lineage back according to common ancestry and common descent, you're going to get closer and closer in relationship down the lineage. But they are very, very far apart.
Yes.
Well, convergence is this phenomenon that a lot of people don't talk about, which is you can have, not only can you have a branching structure where populations of organisms actually remain relevantly similar in their characteristics, they share, you know, almost all of the same characteristics. They may just be vary in relevant ways, genotypically and phenotypically. But not only that, but they can actually be in wholly other distinct regions and parts of the world and
Yes.
actually still converge along the same structures and
Mhm.
along the same traits that other organisms have. And that's the part that is very striking, which is, what does a an organism in the in more tropical hot parts of the world have anything to do with organisms in a more cold and more harsher parts of the world, right? And we
Right.
see convergence not only at the level of animals, but we also see convergence at the level of simple microorganisms, right? We see them unicellular, we see them multicellular. And so what's interesting is we often see evolution almost reusing
The
structures,
same forms,
structural
right?
patterns
Yeah.
in in many other areas. And so there's these constraints that are impinging upon
Yeah.
how organisms develop and what kind of structure they can have. And a lot of the
Yes.
time, what doesn't Morris, Simon Cumming Morris, doesn't he document like almost what, like 100 different convergencies that we've been able to
Oh, yeah. And
cover?
didn't even seem like, related, like whatsoever. Different parts of the world, like you're mentioning, different environments that kind of converge into these similar structures.
Absolutely. And so we see that, well, there seems to be a kind of a direction almost like built into it where
Right.
it's
Like
it's
there's
this
an
repeat.
intention. Yeah.
Right, yeah, there's this repeating of structures. And I mean, what do we mean by design, right, Travis? I mean, how I've always understood design is a lot of people think we mean design as like design must mean this particular very, 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 very intentional act. But honestly, the presence of design
No.
is just, there is a goal and there is a direction. Like
Right. And
flat,
they're
there's
moving
a
towards
goal and
that
there's a
goal.
direction.
Exactly. Yeah.
And
Right.
and
It's
and
the,
then it comes down
this
to,
is
can
the,
that goal or direction be hit? Like is the best probabilistic resources that we can use to aim at that
right.
goal and direction chance, or is it intentionality?
Right. Yeah, that's exactly right. It's very consistent, I would argue, with, in intentionality, in something that it's moving towards, because you have this precision and within the laws of physics that sort of guide the biological process along what routes it can take and, what type of, and there's, with all of this convergence of the same structures and forms, it seems very in line with an intentional outcome, and it correlates with the cosmic fine-tuning, with the planetary fine-tuning, and so it just kind of, it all accumulates. And I'm saying that intentionality would offer the best explanation for it, and that this intentionality, that these observations are in line with what I'm saying St. Maximus is saying, that the creation and organisms within the creation are moving towards their intended ends.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so we have these two things in conjunction with one another, and you already have this defeat laden understanding built into
Right.
the core premise,
Yes.
which is,
Yeah, it
St.
is. Yeah.
Maximus's understanding of this global, almost cosmic theosis.
Right. And so the defeat condition is what's screening off the evil here. That I'm saying that the suffering that does exist will be organically integrated into an overall good whole that's defeated. And so that mainly occurs that the animals will become animal saints, similar to martyr. Like I think that's a type of martyrdom where they reign victoriously. Because what's really interesting. I don't know if you have dogs, but dogs are, they're the happiest they are is when you praise them for a job well done. When you pet them and let them know they did something good. And so I think most of the animals will be, forever honored and praised amongst the angels and saints for their playing their part in the overall redemptive narrative. That they have like a structure similar to martyrs. It's a type of martyrdom.
Yeah, absolutely. And
And I'm getting that from Schneider. Yeah.
right, and there is a disagreement between those like Schneider and those like Doherty on
Right.
what
I
is the
remain open
exact
about
way
that.
that things are going to look like in the eschaton. How exactly is the defeat going to play out? And
I'll leave
honestly,
that to mystery.
right, exactly. You can
The
totally leave
divine
that to
mystery.
mystery.
I don't know, but I know it will.
Right, exactly. Because of God's character, because of God's
Right.
nature, we can be confident in the fact that whatever suffering, these are the conditions, right? In
Yeah.
logic, they call this entailment modulo et.
Entailment relation. Yeah.
Yeah, which is basically this idea that certain entailments can actually be drawn when certain conditions are actually in place, and these conditions can actually be contingent. So we can actually draw an entailment from particular contingent conditions, and these contingent conditions are such that if there are animals who suffer and there's a profusion of animal suffering, then with
Yeah.
that condition in place, the entailment that we can draw from the proposition that God exists and the character that we understand him to have is that God will provide a destiny, a future state for
Right.
these creatures to do what is required with high probability of success to defeat their suffering, whatever that looks like. And really it's up to
Yeah.
theodicy to put together a coherent, a very a probable um, narrative that is wholly in line and congruent with the commitments of theism about
Right.
what that destiny would be. For Doherty, it is this animal theosis, right?
Right.
And then for
Right.
Schneider, it is his martyrdom status. If martyrdom status is what it takes to defeat the suffering in these creatures'
Mhm.
lives, then that's great. If it is a theosis of what's required, if animal consciousness needs to actually be
Right.
raised to higher levels, then
Yeah.
so be it, right? Either way, in the end, what are we retaining, right? There's going to be this defeat for those
Right.
creatures.
Yeah, whatever it means to be fully defeated, and how that goes, I leave it to, the divine mystery of God's infinite love and mercy and his will. He will defeat that, even if I don't know exactly how. I lean towards like Schneider's martyrdom case because that kind of just seems the natural end of creatures like that, but I leave it open as well.
Absolutely. So I have a question
Yeah.
for you. What do you do, or not what do you do, but how would you respond to someone who might say, well, if God can provide this afterlife for animals, for all
Mhm.
creatures, where they can, play out this either process of divinization, or they can, you know, be put into the presence of God such that they actually do receive this kind of status. What's the purpose of this initial portion of reality where we have to
Oh,
suffer so
okay.
much when we could just,
Yeah.
have that heavenly reality from the get-go?
So there's a bit to say here. Part of this gets into which I didn't flesh out, but I was mentioning earlier this idea of a divine narrative, a great story, like Rasmussen calls it, and that's that I think according to theism, God has promised that everything will be integrated, and like we were saying, and wholly defeated. And so when it comes to why uh, this particular segment of reality, I think number one, it's important theosis is a journey. It's a journey there, and it's something we have to freely choose. I think it's one of the ways to accumulate saintly virtues. I know this. You can see this. Speaking of the church fathers, in the lives of the saints, like Saint Polycarp of Smyrna or Saint Ignatius of Antioch, who suffered horrendously, but they went to their deaths victorious because their suffering was defeated by the intimacy they shared with Christ in His sufferings. And so I think there are some values that this did obtain best. And so the way we look at it is that God has created a world for the general population, that is saint fostering, that fosters this sainthood that can develop. But I don't think mere global goods are the end of the story, or anything like that. I don't even think they justify horrendous suffering. For that, I think God would have to narrate a great story of victory for every individual creature, that their lives would be valuable and meaningful on the whole. And so there's also the idea that in the Eastern Orthodox view, when you ask why this specific way instead of that way, well, it's a divine mystery. In our view, we don't claim to have like all the specific details, just that God has chosen to do this way. There are values that can obtain from this saintly virtues, and I actually think it's more valuable to actually overcome something and actually be victorious rather than just sort of being imbued with a false sense. I think the latter is more valuable.
And that's actually one thing I was going to point out. But before I point that out, Marilyn McCord Adams, she sets her bar, with some modesty when it comes to her criteria for success. She goes, listen, when it comes to addressing horrendous suffering, in her book, Horrendous Evils and the Goodness of God, she says, does the defeat response at the end of the day demonstrate that God is good or that he's bad? If this defeat response demonstrates that God is good, then I call it a goodness retaining theodicy, right? Which is, if theodicy is just there to retain the goodness of God, right? If it's just there to restore this idea that, we can actually still say that God is good, then mystery is perfectly fine when it comes to those other components, right? I mean, even Trent Doherty told me, I asked him, I said, so how would you explain specifically why God would have suffering come through like an evolutionary means? And he says, we don't even need to know that. We just need to have this part in place.
That's something the Orthodox would say is part of the mystery of creation, that creation has this sort of ineffable, mysterious nature to it that we don't know. But what we do know, with God narrating a great story and various other means, number one, by revelation and by the teachings of the church fathers. So, what we get, that's part of those safety rails too. The writings of the fathers and their consensus are part of those safety rails. And that kind of leads us on our journey. And, that's where we get the idea of the story, a victorious narrative, because, even that knowledge, I think, would be too mysterious to obtain without revelation. And so.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it's really interesting in how reason can lead to God. Do I have it over here? I do. In how reason can lead to God. Rasmussen talks about how, with this forward-looking theodicy, right? Eschatology versus protology. I always love to point that out, right? We cannot view these things in terms of protology, which is what has already happened. We view these things as what is going to happen. And it's always forward looking. There's always something on the horizon. There's this, what John Hout, the process theologian, calls how the cosmos is going through this process of awakening, where the cosmos is being called and getting closer to God, right? And so we don't view the universe in terms of its history from behind us. We view the universe in terms of its eventual history in front of us. And so the idea here is, under that model, it would predict mystery.
Right.
Because and so, we have yet to know.
And what's really interesting is how there's a big debate. You see this like in apologists too. Like, did the universe have a true beginning at the Big Bang? And science, and there's, I think, scientists and philosophers are right to kind of push back and say, well, in the absence of a working theory of quantum gravity, we can't say. It could have been an infinite. There's all kind. Since we don't have that. The moments just before inflation, we don't really know. And that would actually be explained by the mystery of creation, because likewise, the Orthodox say that, God's way of creating is mysterious, that creation is a divine mystery. And so, that's one of the things I've noticed too, is with the soul building theodicy, like I see a lot of pushback. Well, why would God allow this particular anomaly? that particular anomaly, it's like everything has to be explained through soul building, and that's not the case. For us, it's a divine mystery that will accumulate in the agents being victorious and united to God in theosis. So,
Absolutely, absolutely. One
yeah.
last part to kind of end this off for us
Yeah.
is, what do you do with the objection of, well, you talk about defeat and eventual victory and all this, but
Hmm.
doesn't there just seem to be some suffering that we've observed in people's lives that have completely destroyed them? They never recovered. The
Sure.
victory just seems, there are some evils in this world that are so impactful, so intense, we don't even want to speak of them, that have maimed the psyche of so many people. I mean,
Right.
how can you have so much confidence that that these people are going to have this victorious triumph?
Yeah, I think Stockholm syndrome would be a good example where they actually identify with their captors. Their mind has been so traumatized. So yeah, I think there are cases where people, and I'm going to follow Trent Doherty's thinking here, where at the end of their lives, it seemed like they were in a state of defeat, but that doesn't tell us anything about their eventual state on the whole. And we're saying, that God, has reason that He's revealed to us to bring about this eventual state. So we look at whether it's a defeasible evil, whether it can in principle be defeated, or whether it cannot. Now, I haven't seen any evidence of any indefeasible evil, but I'm not saying it couldn't, there couldn't be. I think it's metaphysically possible that there is some state of affair that just could not be redeemed like whatsoever. But I think even things like Stockholm syndrome, the agent will come to see how it's trust in God that makes them whole, and how their lives were valuable and meaningful, and how God can defeat that. Likewise, they will come to identify with Christ in His suffering, and that beatific intimacy will be so valuable and so much a part of their identity that it becomes valuable, non-regrettable to them within their life on the whole. And so those just kind of my thoughts on that. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, my thoughts on that is very similar, which is, well, one, I kind of I go towards a intrinsic I focus on the intrinsicality of human nature, right? Which is, okay,
Okay.
well, we look at Viktor Frankl, and Viktor Frankl talks
Oh,
about
that's
his
a
book
good one.
Man's Search
Yeah.
for Meaning. He wrote that book 9 days, actually, 9 days after he got out of the
Right.
concentration camps. Everything he learned about, which revolutionized the field of logotherapy forever. He in that field of psychotherapy, he talks about how that window of opportunity that everyone has between stimulus
Mhm.
and response. We have a window of opportunity to choose freely exactly what our attitudes and beliefs and meanings we actually impose on our given situation is. And he says, and how people choose to do that was the separator between people who lost their lives in the concentration camps and those who actually found it. And what's interesting is,
Okay.
okay, well, if we are at bottom, all of us are equally human, right? We share this human nature. Then what we can do is this. Well, if it is possible that suffering of the most horrendous kind is defeasible, then that is open for every human. And obviously, that possibility premise has been satisfied. Why? Because Viktor Frankl observed humans defeating their suffering in the
Right.
concentration camp. And so it's not
Yeah.
a matter of that we lack the resources innately to do so, because obviously
We have
we have
examples.
observed
Yeah.
humans defeating their suffering, and we all share a human nature. So it's not the
Right.
human nature part that prevents someone from defeating their suffering. What it really is the time. It's the temporal sequence between the
Right.
suffering and the
Right.
person and what they have had to go through to learn it. And so in my mind, it's like, okay, well, the possibility premise is satisfied. That's true. Then some people are going to need a moment of recovery and time to play out for them to actually sift through their experiences to do that integration that we talk about.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so the opportunity is open for every person. It's a matter of, well, then if it doesn't happen in this life, well, then all God has to do is give them the opportunity and space for recovery in the next.
Right.
And
And
that's the way I
I
look at
do
it.
think I do think that part of the repose in Christ will consist of that. I think part of our rest, when we join the great cloud of witnesses, with the angels and the saints, and fellowship with Christ Himself, there will be a rest and recovery and come to see things more clearly and everything. And I just want to go back to what you were saying before, because it's not just theoretical. I mean, we have real life examples of horrendous suffering being defeated, as you mentioned. With certain Holocaust survivors actually becoming, better for their experience. And I think, as an Orthodox, we're really big on reading the lives of the saints. And all throughout church history, there have been terrible, terrible martyrdoms of various saints for being Christian, and they went to their deaths triumphantly. They were glad. To them, they had reached their fulfillment because they were identifying with Christ and His sufferings, and so they defeated that horrendous evil that they were going through while they were still alive. In fact, a lot of people would go to where they're going to be martyred, where they were holding them in jail, I guess for a few days before they executed them. They would go and ask the martyrs to pray for them when they got to heaven, because they would have such high honor with Christ that they were actually giving them prayer requests to ask Jesus Himself, because they were held in such a high honor that they had reached such a high level of union with God.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I
So,
love that.
yeah,
And
so that suffering that they went, that it was defeated even before they went to the afterlife. So, how much more so when they behold Christ and participate in His energies.
1000%. And honestly, it's like we can just just concept, like our ability to conceive of it, right? I mean, the problem isn't the suffering. It's this is how people tend to look at it, is they look at the nature of the suffering. But here's the thing,
Right.
Travis, is it's actually what determines the impact of the suffering is the nature of the psyche that experiences the suffering. And so, for
That's
example,
absolutely true. Yes.
right. And so God could easily just do do something in his omnipotent, with his infinite resources. He could give us an experience or a kind of psyche under certain conditions
Mhm.
where when we actually look at the suffering, what Saint Isaac the Syrian
Oh.
says,
Mhm.
it would render it infinitely small in our
Yeah.
perspective. God can do that for every creature.
Right.
And I don't see, just in the context of modality, I don't see any metaphysical impossibility of us having of God being able to map our psyche on a particular frequency that is not
Right.
destroyed or no longer impacted by a suffering where it actually renders it infinitely small. So I think
Right.
oftentimes we need to be a little bit more creative in our thinking. Obviously, not too creative where we go outside the bounds of what's logically and metaphysically possible. But I see
Mhm.
no logical contradictions. I see no metaphysical impossibilities here in any kind
No.
of moral system that tells me that God couldn't do that. And if that's what's required for creatures to defeat their sufferings, and that's exactly what God will do. Well, hey man, great way to end it off. Travis, thank you so
Yeah.
much for coming on and sharing this. And for everyone else that
Absolutely.
wants to be getting a little bit more acquainted with mystical theology and Eastern Orthodox tradition, I will definitely have some resources for you in the description. I don't really know what they are right now, but they will be
I
there
can
for
give
you
you
guys.
some. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Travis will hook me up. And yeah, Travis on Facebook is very active. He's also been on many other places on other channels by mutual friends of
Yeah.
mine. So if you want to see more of his stuff, I can link those down in the description. And like always, if you are someone who, hey, maybe thinks that this is a little bit over their head or wants to dive deep into this, look at the description and look at the comments below. If you want to have a chance for you to work with me and maybe even have me walk you through these in a more intimate process and setting, that is definitely there for you. And so I'll leave us with that. Thanks for tuning in. If you want to master your worldview, first got to master your beliefs. Signing out.